Hello and welcome to Career Center. I'm Kimberly White, Executive Director of the Community Career Center, a resource center located in Naperville. Career Center will feature experts sharing career advice, tips, and trends as it relates to job search. Joining me today are two professionals who have specialized in the art of public speaking, Malotke-Meslin and Mike Russo. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
So before we get started, I want for you to share with our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and your connection with the CCC. I know as volunteers, so. Rebecca, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I am the Director of Enrollment and Financial Aid at the Avery Coonley School. We're a preschool through 8th grade independent school for gifted and talented children in Downers Grove. And I've been there for about 5 years, but I've been working in admissions and enrollment for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I love working in schools. Getting to be around kids while getting to work with the grown-ups on a daily basis is wonderful. And my connection with Community Career Center and with you, Kim, is that I also serve as the chair of the Women in Business Committee as part of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. And every year our committee gets to select a nonprofit of choice that we kind of adopt for the year. And Community Career Center was our nonprofit. So we've been working together all year, and it's been a wonderful connection so that some of the women in our community who are already working in businesses can lend their volunteer hours and spend some time with your clients.
Yeah, very good. And you have been doing that. You've been doing workshops on public speaking, and they've been well received.
And it's been a great experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And what about you, Mike? A little bit about yourself.
So I was a learning and development professional. I worked for the city of Naperville as a city trainer for 5 years. And then after that, I worked for Comcast as a leadership instructor. So as I like to say, I corrupted leaders' minds all over the country. I currently I volunteer at the Community Career Center and travel a lot when I'm not doing that.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you both so much for doing this, and as well as your volunteer efforts at the Community Career Center. So public speaking, I mean, the sheer, when you even hear the words public speaking makes people nervous. What are some tips? I want to talk about some tips, some traits, some things we could share with our audience about how to get over that fear, that nervousness of public speaking. Who wants to tackle that first?
So, know your material is number one. People think that public speaking is this elite club, and when you get into it, it's exclusive and people admire you. And what people don't realize is they can be in that club too. It's just a matter of learning some of the techniques and then practice.
So knowing the content,
absolutely,
knowing that is very important. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that along with that, this idea of a growth mindset. So a lot of people see other people who are doing really wonderful public speaking, and they think, I'm not like that. I don't know that I could get there. They feel like it's a fixed quality in them that they'll never be a good public speaker, and so they don't necessarily try, and they kind of put up that wall. So one of the things that I really want to instill in others is that this is, like so many other things, a learned quality. This is a learned skill, and that it does take a lot of practice, but you have to first believe that you can do it and evaluate yourself on a regular basis. I think like many executives, right, who have coaches, I always point this out to people, even the people who you think are at the top of their game are getting coached by someone, right?
Absolutely.
Same thing with public speakers. And so those of us who look like we know what we're doing are practicing and refining and practicing and asking for lots of feedback. And I would say that's probably one of the harder things to do, is ask for feedback. Because it's going to be honest. And that's sometimes hard.
Well, and if you want honest feedback, right? That's the only way to really get better at something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you say practice, what are you doing to practice? Are you like in front of a mirror? Are you doing it in front of your spouse, your kids? How are you practicing?
I think for me it really depends on your level that you're starting at, right? If you are scared out of your mind to get up in front of any group of people and speak, you're probably not going to start there. You might want to start recording yourself, right? We have this wonderful technology now that pretty much every phone can record, right, in a way that we didn't have 10 or 15 years ago even. So recording yourself and watching yourself first, I think you'll start to already make some adjustments and maybe refine before maybe you get up in front of a few people or a group of people to truly, quote unquote, practice, right? And that could be your family, it could be friends, colleagues, absolutely.
What about you?
I'm kind of chuckling because earlier we spoke about when I first started speaking publicly and practicing for a presentation, I was doing it in front of a mirror and then in front of my 6-year-old daughter. She said, "That's very nice, Daddy." She didn't know what I was saying, but it was a person. And then to videotape myself and to watch that back, because the camera doesn't lie, does it? That's the best feedback you can get. Wow, look, I keep licking my lips, or oh, my hand keeps moving, or I'm wringing my hands, or rocking back and forth. All of these little idiosyncrasies that we don't realize we're doing are picked up by a video camera.
What about another thing that I've heard is when you're in front of folks, you want to be able to, well, one, you need to know your audience, right? How important is that?
Absolutely.
Share a little bit about that.
So I have seen speakers present the most beautiful, eloquent speech, and they've completely missed the mark because they haven't researched their audience and what their audience is looking for. They can speak above their heads. They could speak about information that these people have known for years. It's really important to just get some feedback, understand who you're speaking to before you.
So ahead of time, try to find that information out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was, when we were talking earlier, I was commenting that I have a tendency to talk with my hands a lot. When I'm presenting to kids, that's great, right? They love the animated, jumping around on a stage, engaging them. I have to engage them in that. When I'm presenting to my board of trustees, that's not what I'm doing, right? But I think a lot of people do miss that mark, or they haven't quite done their research. And I think if you're presenting somewhere, like for me at my first board of trustees meeting ever, I made sure I asked lots of people how this was going to go. Who directly am I speaking to at that meeting? Am I speaking to everybody? Is it just the board chair? So that I had a really clear understanding of what information I needed to have ready to go in my head, and also what information I needed to have handy to reference. And that's another pice of that preparation, I think, too.
You just said something about using your hands, and I know a lot of people do that, and I'm guilty of that as well. What are some things that you do to kind of keep you from doing that? Because it's so hard to just not.
Well, mine are taped under the table.
There you go.
Because
that's what I need to do.
I do tend to talk with my hands also. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, well, for women, most times we don't have pockets. So I actually try to wear pants if I'm presenting, if I feel like I need to quiet my body, right? That's what we call it when we're talking to children, quiet your body. So I will wear pants so that I know I can put my hands in my pants pockets, and that kind of quiets my body a little bit, as opposed to wringing them. But I've also gotten comfortable putting my hands behind my back. If I feel like I'm getting a little too animated, but that's part of the practicing, right? Is practicing some of those things that might have felt a little awkward at first, but now once you do it a few times, you realize that's another technique.
What about you?
Well, you use the term guilty. I don't see it as guilty, Kim. I see it as a benefit. Body language is a big part of your presentation, and you can use your hands as long as you don't use them too much. You can use your hands to help accentuate a point. You may be bringing something up here, and all of a sudden you see all the eyes go up here, and that's okay.
It's just if it's constant, like
I think
kind of distracting. Sometimes it can be a distraction.
If it's a distraction.
I think with anything, whether that's your clothing or your hand gestures, if it's taking the audience's attention away from what you're trying to communicate, then it's too much. And those are fine lines, but I think it's something to focus on.
Right. What about tone?
Tone.
Go right ahead.
Tone is so important. Oftentimes, one could be monotone and lose your audience, or you can start to sound like a laughing dolphin with your tone, and that can distract people too. So it's really important to monitor your tone, recognize how you sound by videotaping yourself in advance. I know a lot of people also speed up when they get nervous, and their voice starts to climb. And interestingly, I once read that Oprah Winfrey took voice lessons to lower her tone, because if you have a lower tone, you actually come across as more authoritative.
Really? Yeah, I actually heard that.
Kim.
That's true. It makes me, What about you?
I would say I was going to mention the speed issue, because for me still, I am a very fast talker on a daily basis, just in my normal everyday life. And in conversation, it's easy. The first conversation you and I had in your office lasted like 2 hours, I think.
Yes.
Wow.
And we talked at a very rapid pace, because I knew that you were receiving the information as fast as I was giving it. With a broad audience, you don't know how quickly or slowly they're processing that information. Now, I will say some people talk extremely slow as well. And during my presentation at Community Career Center, I mentioned that I'm a fast processor auditorily. So when people talk like this,
You've lost me.
I can't focus in those circumstances.
Yeah.
So again, I think gauging that speed and finding that sweet spot takes a lot of practice, and it's something that I still have to work at.
Yeah. What about using humor or telling stories when you're presenting? You both. What are your thoughts on that?
I love it. I love incorporating it.
And I guess it would depend on the subject matter as well.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And you have to know what type of humor. It can't be low humor. Can't be locker room talk. It's got to be appropriate for the audience, whatever that means. So absolutely incorporate it. It ties into storytelling. If you can tell a story while you're speaking publicly, and if people can see themselves in your story, then you have your audience, and your message is received.
I completely agree. I think one of the things that I love to do is use anecdotes about myself. I try to humanize, right, and let the audience. I'm trying to build a relationship with my audience, and if it's not a group of people that I've ever met before, I want them to know a little bit more about me, so that they can feel like we're building that trust, so that as we're communicating, right, they have a little more background information about me, and I use little anecdotes throughout that just personalize certain experiences and that storytelling.
And that ties into connecting to your audience. And if your audience, you make that connection, it's much easier to make your point and have it stick.
Absolutely.
What about, reading from an outline?
No, you should know your material so well.
That you should.
And I advise people to start with it written out completely, then move to an outline, and then get to a point where you're speaking off of one word each.
In each one.
That way you really know your material. If you have a PowerPoint, you can have one word up there versus the PowerPoints that have the Bible up there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know the material so well, you don't have to be looking at
So you
notes.
really should get to that point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen some really good speakers get caught up in their own PowerPoint presentations or their own notes. When I'm thinking, I know you know this information and you know it like the back of your hand, but that's actually what's tripping you up, not the public.
Not
yeah.
the public, yeah.
Yes, and they're looking to those notes when they really know the material.
Right.
So again, that's the really heavy practice piece.
Yeah.
If it's something new, especially that you're presenting.
Absolutely. And there's always that time where you can walk into some place and the computer isn't working, and now what? You're stuck, right? So, all right, we are going to come right back to continue our discussion on effective public speaking skills. We'll be right back after these important public service announcements.